The best box that you see, baby! Right hand! Touch Holloway there.
Yikes. Yet again, Max Holloway managed to be another upcoming prospect in stylish and spectacular fashion. And when Max fights, you honestly can't turn your interest away from his performance. He's always showing something fascinating, both as an entertainer and break down the story of what went down in that cage. There's a lot of fascinating things I discovered studying this fight, and at the end of this, I'll give you a better idea of what transpired and highlight some of the cheat that could have been made from Kattar. If you're really interested in learning Max's tactics to add into your own game, stay tuned because I have some really cool stuff to show you. When this fight happened, we saw a huge difference in their skill levels. Max was incredibly active in this fight and he showed he was a better fighter that day by being dominant and consistent. He also managed to break several records with this performance. Max seemed to really be fired up regarding comments made about his boxing compared to Kattar's boxing. It looked like he was seriously trying to prove a point that he was a superior boxer, and I have to say, it was a pretty amazing performance despite how one-sided it was. Max did a good job of showing he was the overall better fighter, but let's take a look at how he was specifically when we look at the story of how Max Holloway's aggression shut down Calvin Kattar's game. There's a big difference in how these fighters defend shots. If you've seen in my previous work, Holloway doesn't typically like to shell up and trade back. He's more likely to utilize head movement and footwork to disengage from the opponent's offense. It's a good method because you avoid damage, but you also deny the opponent from scoring. This fight was no different in that Holloway would use evasive head movement and footwork to shut down Kattar's offensive game. When you look at Kattar's defense, the story really starts to form together and you start to see how Max was able to pick him apart. Kattar has a tendency to sit in the pocket and block shots. And for this particular fight, he was more likely to shell up than to evade and use footwork. This was a big issue because against someone like Max, this is the last guy that you want to shell up against in a fight. Max is great at stringing together combos and working the opponent's guard in order to find those openings. And because of Kattar's tendencies to stay in the pocket, it gave Max a greater advantage to pick him apart. There were a ton of tactics used to find openings in Kattar's guard, and I can't possibly go through all of them, but I will show you the ones he was very consistent on landing. There's an important theme to keep in mind here. Kattar depends on his shelling guard, so the overall strategy was to get through those walls to find an opening. When it came to breaching the guard, this tactic I'll show you is something that you all might be familiar with if you follow my work, because I cover this quite often. Here, Holloway likes to reach at the opponent's hand. The opponent will often try to reach back to check Holloway's hand. This kind of engagement in a fight is to control the range. However, when you reach out like this, you tend to leave an opening. Max will purposely reach out from the outside range to draw the hands forward and quickly switch to a stepping lead hook to catch that opening. To emphasize this point, pay attention to Max's lead hand. He's going to reach out, and that's going to prompt Kattar to reach back out to his lead hand to check it. But he's going to leave an opening right there. Max is going to use a stepping lead hook to catch that opening, and then he's going to follow it up with more offense. Now this is just another example from a different angle where Max is going to establish the rhythm of reaching out. Now he's going to prompt himself forward as though he's going to reach, and then that's going to make Kattar reach for his hand. You'll notice that he's going to leave that opening again. Max is going to switch his attack to a lead hook to catch that opening. And then right here, you're going to see him slowly reach for that lead hook. Right there. This is also a signature move that Max has done to previous opponents as well. He likes to establish that rhythm to create that opening and then he exploits it. For Kattar, he fell for this trick very consistently. I've actually never really seen someone fall for this tactic as much as Kattar has. Kattar has a tendency to always use his rear hand to parry that straight punch, but it leaves an opening that Max managed to take advantage of multiple times. I noticed Kattar tried adjusting from getting hit in the opening by slipping off to the side, but even then Max found an opening by just going straight to the body. One particular tactic that worked well was when Max used his lead hand to occupy Kattar's hand. Now this momentarily occupied Kattar's weapon, And while Kattar was doing this, he left his guard up to only one side of his head, but he left the opening right down the middle. And then you saw on multiple occasions, Max would find an opening by throwing that vertical elbow right into the opening. This next signature move is a tactic Max used to split the guard. He'll often throw his cross and then follow it up with a jab or an up jab. And this tends to work really well for Max's style because he tends to throw in volume and it overwhelms his opponents. When you throw a cross, a natural shot to throw after it would be a lead hook. But Max generally throws a jab instead, and this is because the jab is the quickest path to the opponent since it's a straight trajectory. This means that you can chain your attacks faster by throwing the jab right after the cross. This gives the opponent less time to find an opening to counter back, and as a result you actually rarely saw Kattar find his openings to counter back. This is something that he's done to previous opponents too, and this is definitely something that brought him success several times throughout his fight with Kattar. It worked exceptionally well too because the jab would often split Kattar's guard, opening him up for follow-up shots. Max has many variations of throwing this combo, but this worked particularly well against someone who's willing to block. I'll give you a few examples of different variations. Here's one where he throws his cross and uses the hop step while throwing a jab to hit another angle off to the side. This angular change makes it hard to counter Max because his head is never really in a static position. So it's going to be hard to find counters on him when he's moving like this. Another variation I've seen him use is when his opponents retreat. He'll throw the cross and catch the opponent retreating by hop stepping with the jab to follow up to their new position. So this is a variation where he throws a cross and does a jab while stepping off at an angle. So you're going to see he's going to throw that cross and he's going to move laterally at a different angle. When he moves to this angle, it's going to be harder for Ortega to attack because he's not within Ortega's offensive angle in the red shaded area there. But while he moves off laterally, he's going to pop in that jab. And you see here that Ortega, he doesn't have much of a chance to attack because he's in such a bad position. So he has to readjust his angle. But here, Max could score just another free shot. This one is a personal favorite of mine. It's subtle and it's not so easy to catch at first, but I'll explain the idea behind it. Max will often pop his jab out, then he'll retract it only about halfway and then fire it again. This works really well because it throws off the opponent's timing. Okay, so let's break this down. So Max is going to throw his jab, and you see the full extension of his arm. Now he's only going to retract about halfway back. And here you see that if he retracts only about halfway back, he only has to travel another half distance again. And when he does this, it can throw off the opponent's timing and their rhythm. And here he can sneak in a jab and then follow up with a power shot. I thought this one might be worth mentioning since it seems to be a new addition he added to his striking, where he uses his rear oblique kick. Fighters tend to use the oblique kick by chambering the lead leg. In this fight, he decided to use his rear leg to do it. This might be due to the fact that it's actually easier to disguise the kick this way. Since he's throwing the oblique kick by using his rear leg, he can actually mask it to look like various other attacks with the rear leg. Like look at this example. Since he's chambering from the rear leg, it's kind of hard to tell what kind of kick is coming. You don't know if it's a cut kick or if it's an oblique kick, so it's kind of hard to tell throwing from that position. Kattar didn't really find much success at all when it came to going on the offense, and there weren't a lot of setups that really seemed to work for him. Max was more likely to evade, use head movement and footwork rather than taking on the guard like Kattar did, and this made it really difficult for Kattar when he wanted to go on the attack. His tendencies to stay in the pocket didn't really help him much either. If you were to compare Kattar's defense to someone like Alexander Volkanovski, Volkanovski did not shell up as much to trade when he fought Max. He was actually more likely to counter almost right away or to evade. Volkanovski did not allow himself to stay shelled up too long because that would have given Max more time to breach his defenses like he was able to do with Kattar. This made it more difficult for Max to find his offensive rhythm against someone like Volkanovski. Max didn't land as many body shots against Volkanovski compared to someone like Kattar either. This is due to the fact that Volkanovski was less likely to stay in the pocket too long for Max to work the body. One of Max's main ways of setting up body shots is to draw the fighter into guarding, and then while they're guarding the face, it exposes their body, then he tends to slam those openings. With the way that Max sets this up, it requires two things to happen. First, he needs the opponent to stay in the pocket to take the shot. Then second, he needs to manipulate their guard to create that opening. Kattar made it really easy for those requirements to be met because he would regularly stay in the pocket to shell up. When Volkanovski went on the offense, he found so much success compared to Kattar. When it came to offense, Volkanovski knew how to fight on the move to deal with Max's evasive footwork, like Volkanovski's shifting power hand. Kattar did find a nice opening at one point when he actually decided to put Max on the back foot after throwing a gazelle hook and following it up with a power shot. You really had to put Max on the back foot if you want to find an opening in his defense, and we've seen this from various fighters that Max has fought so far, like Brian Ortega, when Ortega managed to find an opening by moving in with his lead hook and following up with a power shot. Max tends to leave an opening right over his shoulder while he's retreating, so most fighters aren't always able to catch him because he's moving, but the ones who could close that distance and capitalize on that opening tend to find their mark there. A lot of Kattar's success comes from the jab. His jab technique is actually quite good. He landed the jab a good number of times, but you're going to see down the line that Max was actually able to shut down his jab. And this contributed to why Kattar couldn't really get much of his offense going too. Kattar's jab was technically sound, but it just didn't really offer as much versatility compared to Max's jab. Max was using his jab to bait out counters, measure distance, breach openings in the guard, and he just had overall better utility. Aggressive fighters carry this specific mentality when it comes to exchanges. They're greedy. In any exchange, they want to ensure that they are the ones who get the most out of it than their opponents. So if an opponent throws something, you throw twice as much back. They carry the mindset that if you hit me, I'm going to hit you more and I'm going to hit you harder. In this fight, Max did an excellent job of carrying this philosophy. When Kattar would throw something, Max would make it a point to reply back by ensuring that Kattar paid for it. For example, when Kattar threw leg kicks, Max would reply back by going to the body. This worked particularly well because after kicking, fighters tend to shell up the majority of the time to protect their face, but they tend to leave an opening to the body. This meant Holloway could score free shots to unguarded areas. I also have to mention that Kattar's leg kicks didn't have much variety. He threw them naked, not as much setups, so they didn't have as much meaningful purpose. Many of the kicks were actually easily evaded because of how transparent it was of what Kattar was trying to do. Now, I mentioned earlier that Kattar had troubles getting his offense going because Max would answer his jab. Now here's how. When Kattar would try popping in a jab, Max would make him pay and counter it by pairing the jab with a rear hand and coming back with a volume of strikes, usually a jab followed by a series of other punches. Okay, so here, Kattar is going to throw his jab, Max is going to catch it with his rear hand and parry it slightly, and he's going to move his head slightly off too. Then right after that, he's going to come back with his own jab with another shot. Any shot that Kattar would attempt, Max would reply back by throwing a bunch more at his face. Kattar tried really hard finding a counter right over Max's jab, but I found that Max would punish him for it by attempting that too. Kattar found success, but the amount of times that Max was able to punish him for it was just much more. You'd see Max pull out his jab and then bait the counters and then punish him back with the same counters on numerous occasions, coming back with the jab cross. This is why the fight looked so one-sided. Max just seemed to have an answer for everything Kattar offered. If Kattar wanted to jab, Max had an answer for this too. If Kattar wanted to kick him, Max would reply back with much more. When Kattar tried looking for counters, Max would bait it out and make him pay for that too. It didn't help that Kattar's primary defense is a shell up because he found himself far too complacent in situations that allowed Max to pour it on. Instead of working to move away from the cage, for example, he was more willing to stay glued to it in order to trade with Max. This isn't the most ideal thing to do, primarily because the fact that fighters who aren't up against the cage, they have more degrees of freedom to move about and to evade if they really need to, and this puts the fighters against the cage at a disadvantage. When Max got him to the cage, it was nothing more than beautiful body work, Max pinning his head to his guard and just working the body. However, I did find Kattar finding some success countering Max's body shots occasionally. It was usually right after a straight to the body, Kattar would reply back with a lead hook to catch Max's head on his way back. I don't see a point in a rematch even if Kattar racks up some wins unless I see him correcting some of the habits that got him in trouble in this fight. If he were to fight Max again, he would benefit from using more head movement and more footwork to evade rather than to shell up and take the damage. This essentially gave Max a canvas to paint whatever destruction he wanted to create, and wasn't good for Kattar's performance. Kattar should take a page right off of Volkanovski's approach by not allowing himself to stay complacent in such bad situations. This means not sitting in his shell too long to take damage, not staying on the cage too long to take shots, and as for his jab, since he keeps getting punished from Max parrying it and coming back up with his own offense, I think Kattar should try to utilize a stepping lead hook and switch up the rhythm a little bit more. And this is actually what Max did. When Kattar parried, Max used his hooks to find that opening. Kattar should try applying the same counter because Max presents the same openings when he does this too. The last bit of advice I could offer is to build your offense around Max's defense. Max's primary defense isn't to shell up like Kattar would typically do. Max is more likely to move and adjust his footwork. Kattar's offense should account for this, and he should try to apply more offense to bring the fight to him, like previous opponents have managed to do. Kattar's parry could use some adjustments too. When he parries, he does leave an opening right down the middle and onto the side. One slight adjustment that Kattar could make is to use a slight slip right off to the side while parrying. This would at least mitigate one of the openings right down the middle, and this is actually something that both Volkanovski and Max do well, and it adds an additional layer of defense.
Holloway had Lamas in trouble multiple occasions. Wow. And it looks like they're going to swing to the ground.
And there you have it, folks. This is the story of the fight and is centered around Max's ability to dissect Kattar's guard and having an aggressive answer for everything that he did. When he tried to counter, Max would counter and punish him back twice as much. Whether he tried to establish his jab, Max did the same thing and he punished him for it. Or whether he tried other means of offense, Max would show something to answer for it. I covered Max's fights against Volkanovski and Ortega, so you can visit my WordPress page if you want to see the breakdowns there. Also be sure to bookmark my WordPress page because I got a lot of exclusive content there, and if my work goes missing on YouTube for some reason, you can always go there for the backups. Also, please leave a like if you like this content, it really does help, and hit that bell notification if you want updates on what I discover.